The case of a woman accused of shooting another woman in a Southside barbershop last month will move forward. Prosecutors say the suspect committed the crime and video evidence proves it.
I just spoke to the owner of Bonez Barbershop, and he says one of their customers shot another one of their customers. He says he and his employees had no idea that the two customers knew each other or that this would have happened. He says they were all just cutting hair.
I lost 5 brothers, 3, I think 4 to gun violence, but I never thought that I would lose one of my children or one of my children would die before me.
3 gunshots inside a barbershop chair in the middle of the afternoon. For a few seconds, nobody in that shop knew who fired, who was hit, or why. Then one woman was on the floor. The other one stood up, cape still hanging off her shoulders, and walked out the front door like she was just stepping out for air. She didn't run from what she did. She drove straight home. And then she called the police on herself. Sitting across from investigators, she admitted to something most people in her position never would. And that single admission is the reason this case isn't as simple as it first looks. But here's what almost nobody covering this case has told you. This wasn't the first time gun violence tore through this family. It wasn't the second. This was the 4th. A grandmother who had already buried 3 sons to gun violence was now burying her granddaughter too. Before we get into how that happened, a warning. This case involves gun violence and the death of a young woman, and parts of what follows may be difficult to watch. If you're new here, this is Criminal Affairs. We build every case straight from court documents and verified reporting, not recycled headlines. Subscribe and drop where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's go back to where this family's story actually starts. 18 years ago, a young man left a cookout on a Friday night before Mother's Day and never made it home. His mother would later stand in that same yard describing the spot where she found out her son wasn't coming back. That case has never been solved. 4 years after that, her second son was shot on Pittsburgh's north side. He was rushed to Allegheny General Hospital, but he didn't survive the night. Then came 2012. Her third son was killed on the very same street where his oldest brother had died years before. 3 sons, 3 separate shootings, 3 funerals. All of them were under the age of 20 when they died. Only one of those cases has ever resulted in an arrest. The woman living through all of this is named Lueana Coward. A mother of 6, she buried half her children before any of them turned 20, each time to the same cause, each time in the same city. For most people, one loss like this would be unimaginable. Lueana carried 3. Instead of disappearing into that grief, she turned toward it. She began speaking publicly about her sons. She started a relief fund to support other families going through the same kind of loss. An independent film was eventually made about her life, telling the story of a mother who refused to be defined only by what she'd lost. By every measure, Lueana Coward had already lived through the worst thing a parent can survive. Not once, but 3 times over. What she didn't know yet was that surviving it 3 times wouldn't be enough to stop a 4th. In October of 2025, that 4th loss would arrive. And this time, it wouldn't be one of her sons. It would be her granddaughter. Her granddaughter's name was Rayon Williams. She was 26 years old, from McKeesport, Pennsylvania, the daughter of Michelle Butler and Reuben Williams. Rayan wasn't waiting for her life to start. She was already building it. In 2023, she launched her own clothing line, turning an idea into something she could put her name on, Before that, she worked as a home care worker, spending her days looking after people who needed help with the basics of daily life. Later, she stepped into a management role at a retail sporting goods store, taking on more responsibility, more structure, more of a future she was actively shaping for herself. She had a large family around her, siblings, cousins, a wide circle of people who knew her not as a headline, but as Rayan, the kind of person who was building something real, one step at a time, in a city she'd grown up in. None of that, the clothing line, the new job, the family who loved her, had anything to do with how her story would end. Because if you had told Rayon Williams on the morning of October 4th, 2025, what was waiting for her that afternoon, she wouldn't have believed you. There was no reason to. It was an ordinary Saturday. She had a hair appointment. That single, unremarkable errand would become the last thing she ever did. Before we go there, if you're finding value in how this case is being laid out, hit subscribe now. This channel exists to build these cases from actual court records and verified reporting, not recycled headlines, and there's more of that coming as this one unfolds. Now let's go back to that Saturday afternoon and the barber shop where everything changed. Bonez Barbershop sits on East Carson Street in the South Side Flats, the kind of shop where regulars come and go all day, where the Saturday afternoon rhythm rarely changes. October 4th started like any other Saturday there. The owner was in the back of the shop working through a haircut with one of his barbers. A 19-year-old employee was up front, going about the normal business of the day. It was just past 1 in the afternoon. Myairah Carter was already in the shop. She was 25 years old, from Baldwin, a suburb just outside the city. She was seated in a barber's chair, a cape draped over her lap, waiting to get her hair done like anyone else walking in that day. Underneath that cape, according to police, she had a weapon. Rayon Williams walked in for her own appointment. The two women knew each other. According to court documents, they'd had an ongoing dispute stretching back to 2023, rooted in both of them having been involved with the same person. That history didn't stay outside the shop. Surveillance cameras inside Bonez Barbershop captured what happened next, though the footage has no audio. What it shows is this. Rayan approaches Carter, who's still seated in the chair. The two exchange words no one can hear. Rayan moves closer, standing over Carter, who told police afterward that Rayan was pressing her to step outside. At some point, Rayan's hand moves toward her pocket. The 19-year-old employee noticed the tension building between them and tried to step in, attempting to calm things down before they escalated any further. It didn't work. Carter pulled a handgun out from underneath the cape and opened fire. Witnesses inside the shop describe hearing 3 gunshots in quick succession.
We heard pow, 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 and we all froze, not knowing what's going on. The gun violence is not necessary, we're all trying to make money.
Everyone in the building scattered toward the back, taking cover, unsure in that first moment who had been hit or how badly. Exactly how many of those shots struck Rayan isn't entirely clear. Different accounts from that day put the number at 2, others say more. But what's certain is that she went down inside that barbershop, and she would not walk back out of it. The owner came out from the back to find the aftermath. Carter standing there, the weapon still in her hand, the cape still hanging around her neck. He asked her to leave. She did. Myairah Carter walked out the front door of Bonez Barbershop, got into her car, and drove away. leaving behind a shop full of witnesses, a woman on the floor, and a shooting that had just taken less than a minute to unfold. Myairah Carter didn't run. Not in the way that phrase usually plays out in cases like this. She drove straight home to Baldwin. Once she got there, she called her mother. Then she called her girlfriend. And then she picked up the phone a third time and called 911 herself. When officers arrived, they took her into custody without incident. They also recovered the weapon used in the shooting from inside her vehicle. It was registered in her name. Investigators moved quickly to establish the relationship between the two women. What they found matched what Carter had already told police at the scene. She and Rayon Williams had known each other for roughly 2 years. The conflict between them traced back to 2023, and according to court documents, it stemmed from both women having dated the same person. This wasn't a stranger she'd encountered for the first time that afternoon. It was someone she had history with, and that history was now central to the case being built against her. Then came the detail that changes how this entire case has to be read. When investigators sat down with Carter and asked her directly whether she had actually seen a weapon on Rayon Williams that day, she told them no. She hadn't seen one. She'd told police that Rayan was pressing her to step outside, that Rayan's hand had moved toward her pocket. But when it came to the specific question of whether she saw an actual weapon in Rayan's possession, her answer was no. That single admission would end up carrying more weight in this case than almost anything else recovered from that barbershop. It's worth pausing here on something else the record makes clear. Everything you now know about Rayon Williams, her family, her business, her job, the people who loved her, exists because it was documented publicly after her death. Almost none of that exists for Myairah Carter. Beyond her age and the fact that she's from Baldwin, there is very little on public record about who she is, what her life looked like before that Saturday, or what led her into that barbershop chair with a loaded weapon underneath her cape. That imbalance isn't something this investigation created. It's simply what the public record currently allows us to know. What isn't in question anymore is what happened inside that shop. The shots were fired. The weapon was hers. The relationship between the two women was real, and it went back years. What remained to be decided wasn't what happened. It was what the law would call it. Myairah Carter was formally charged with criminal homicide. She was taken to the Allegheny County Jail, where a judge denied her bail, meaning she would remain in custody as the case moved forward. Back on East Carson Street, the barber shop closed its doors for several days. When the shop's owner spoke publicly about what happened, he described being heartbroken that someone had lost their life inside his business. He said he'd witnessed the immediate aftermath firsthand, and that it wasn't something he expected to get over easily. A nearby business owner who'd heard the gunfire from across the street echoed the same disbelief. This wasn't the kind of incident that neighborhood was used to, and it left the block shaken for days afterward. The shop itself released a statement making clear that what happened did not reflect the environment they worked to build for their clients, and that safety remained their priority going forward. Now back to that moment when Carter walked out of the shop, cape still around her neck, and got into her car. At the time, it looked like someone leaving the scene of a shooting. But what happened in the hours after tells a different story. She didn't go into hiding. She didn't try to leave the state or disappear. She drove home, made her calls, and then called the police on herself. Legally, that sequence matters. Fleeing a scene and later surrendering yourself are two very different things, and prosecutors would eventually have to reconcile that walk out the front door with a woman who turned herself in less than an hour later. That distinction became central once her legal team laid out their defense. Carter's attorney argued this was self-defense, plainly and without hesitation. The position was that Rayon Williams had confronted Carter, refused to back down, and threatened her, going as far as telling her that if she didn't come outside, she'd be waiting for her.
This is without question self-defense. If somebody is in fear of being killed or shot or seriously injured in that moment, then under Pennsylvania law, you have the right to use deadly force.
Is she remorseful?
I think that's a really hard question to answer. She did not want this to happen. She did not bring it on, and she didn't want to have to respond in this way. But she did, because she had to save her own life or save herself from getting seriously attacked and beaten. Remorseful? Yes, she wished it didn't happen. But I think that word doesn't necessarily fit in self-defense cases.
Under Pennsylvania law, if someone reasonably believes they're in danger of being killed or seriously injured, they're permitted to use deadly force to protect themselves. That's the standard the defense built their entire argument around. But that standard requires more than just fear. It requires that the fear be reasonable, and that the force used was actually necessary in that moment. That's where Carter's own words to investigators become impossible to ignore. She told police directly that she never saw a weapon on Rayon Williams. Not a glimpse of one. Not a suspicion confirmed. Nothing. Under Pennsylvania's own legal standard, that single admission raises a difficult question for her defense to answer. How do you argue that deadly force was necessary against a threat you never actually confirmed was armed? That contradiction, a self-defense claim built on fear, sitting across from an admission that undercuts it, is exactly what prosecutors would use to argue this case belonged in front of a jury, not dismissed as justified. If you want to see exactly how that argument played out in court and where this case stands right now, stay with me. Hit subscribe before we go there, because what comes next is where this case either holds together or falls apart. In November of 2025, Myairah Carter's case reached its first real test in front of a judge. At a preliminary hearing, prosecutors laid out their evidence centered on the surveillance footage from inside Bonez Barbershop. That footage showed the sequence investigators had already outlined: the two women exchanging words, Rayan stepping closer, and Carter drawing the weapon from beneath her cape. Carter's defense attorney used that same hearing to make their case publicly for the first time, arguing that this was, in his words, without question, self-defense. He described Rayan as the one who escalated the confrontation, refusing to walk away, daring Carter to come outside and settle things. It was a full-throated defense, built entirely around the idea that Carter had reasonable grounds to fear for her life in that chair. The judge weighing that hearing had a narrow job, not to decide guilt or innocence. That determination was never going to happen that day. The only question in front of the court was whether there was enough evidence for this case to move forward to trial at all. The judge ruled that there was. Myairah Carter was formally held for court on a single count of criminal homicide. That ruling meant the self-defense argument her attorney had just made in that hearing wouldn't be decided there. It would have to wait and be argued again in front of a jury at trial. Following that hearing, Carter's formal arraignment was scheduled for December of 2025. In Pennsylvania, that's typically where a defendant is formally read the charges against them, enters a plea, and where the court starts setting the timeline toward an eventual trial date. And that is where the public record on this case currently stops. As of the release of this video, no further update has surfaced. No trial date has been publicly confirmed. No new hearing has been reported. Whether Carter has entered a plea, whether her legal team has filed any pretrial motions, whether prosecutors have added or adjusted the charge against her, None of that has been made public since December of last year. That's not a gap in this research. That's genuinely where this case stands right now. Cases like this can move slowly through the court system, sometimes for a year or more between a preliminary hearing and an actual trial date, especially when a self-defense claim is involved and both sides know exactly how much is riding on the outcome. What we do know is this: the facts of what happened inside that barbershop are no longer in dispute. The legal argument over what those facts mean, whether this was a justified act of self-defense or a killing that a jury needs to weigh, has not yet been resolved. It won't be resolved until this goes to trial, and right now, there's no confirmed date for when that will happen. For Myairah Carter, that means still waiting, in custody, for her case to move forward. For Rayon Williams' family, it means still waiting for whatever comes next in a courtroom that hasn't given them an answer yet. 4. That's the number this story keeps returning to. Harry, James, Don, and now Rayan. 3 sons lost across more than a decade on different streets in different years, and only one of those cases ever led to an arrest. 2 of those killings remain completely unsolved to this day. No charges ever filed, no one ever held accountable. Lueana Coward has spent years living with that reality, turning her grief into work that helps other families face the same thing.
When I heard the news, I said, what, is it going to start on the girls now?
For over 20 years, Coward has used her experience to help families that lose loved ones. Now she's with her daughter, trying to help her live through the worst pain she's ever known.
She wasn't just a number, and I've been fighting for her all her life, and I'm going to fight for her through her death.
Rayan's case is different from her uncle's in one important way. There's already someone in custody. There's already a charge. There's already a legal process underway, moving toward a trial that hasn't happened yet. That means Rayan's outcome hasn't been written yet. It's the one loss in this family's history that still has a chance to end with an actual answer, in an actual courtroom, decided by an actual verdict, instead of joining her uncle's as another name without one. Whether that trial ends in a conviction, an acquittal, or a self-defense claim that actually holds up is still completely unknown, and it will stay unknown until Allegheny County moves this case forward. When that happens, we'll be covering it. If you want to know how this number changes, and whether Rayan becomes the exception in this family story or another entry in it, subscribe now so you don't miss